We're joined on INSEAD Knowledge by Professor Ilian Mihov, a Professor of Economics at INSEAD. In the March edition of the Harvard Business Review, you have a note in which you're saying that unless China makes reforms, it's not going to be able to continue to grow. There's a barrier, the Great Wall as you call it, at about 10 to 12,000 US dollars per capita. How serious an issue is that for China?
This is actually a note that we wrote with my colleague Antonio Fatas, it's part of a bigger project. We look at what are the main drivers of growth and what are the impediments to growth. And we found a very interesting and important relationship. If you look at the quality of institutions, by quality of institutions we use as a measure an indicator from the World Bank that captures democracy, rule of law, corruption or control of corruption, effectiveness of governments, political stability, and quality of regulation. And if you look at the institutional quality and you try to then link it to income per capita, that is how rich a country is, we find that countries that don't have good institutions, don't have rule of law or have too much corruption, they cannot grow above $12,000. Before that, they can grow very fast, and that's how China is growing today. China is at about $5,000 income per capita, and the quality of institutions is actually in the area where we consider them to be of relatively poor quality. Countries in this area, below $10,000, $12,000, can grow very rapidly by implementing the right policies, by even having a command economy. In fact, in the 1950s and the 1960s, the Soviet Union and all the satellite economies in Eastern Europe were growing at 5, 6, 10% a year, like China today, by having a centrally planned economy. But it turns out that once you reach $10,000, $12,000, these kind of systems don't work anymore. And the reason that we're saying that if China does not reform, if China does not introduce improvements in rule of law and improvements in control of corruption, government effectiveness, then most likely they'll bounce off this wall. The reason that I'm saying this is because the Soviet Union collapsed exactly at that point also. In the 1980s, they reached $12,000, obviously in current dollars, and they started stagnating. Growth actually stopped, and there were a lot of economic problems that eventually led to the collapse of the country. We have seen many countries that have been growing until they reach this point. One example that I very often give is Venezuela. Since 1960 until 2007, Venezuela has been fluctuating between $8,000 and $12,000, obviously depending on the price of oil. But they have never been able to grow above this level. If Venezuela had the right institutions, if Venezuela was growing only like Chile, today Venezuela would have been richer than France, Germany, richer than most European countries. And instead, it has income per capita of only $11,000.
So are you saying in effect then regarding China that it's reaching the critical stage at which really does have to develop the institutions?
Yes, so right now China is at $5,000, and with the current growth rates they will reach the wall, the area, in about 7 to 10 years. At that time, if there have been no reforms, then history at least teaches us that China will stagnate at these levels of $10,000 to $12,000. However, I'm relatively optimistic because I have seen Chinese officials talk about the way that the Chinese government thinks about these issues, and they say that we're moving in the right direction. If we're moving in the right direction, we don't feel like we have to change anything. But if we see that there are problems, then we use all our possible resources in order to make changes. And they have done it in the past. They have dealt with a lot of other obstacles. So I think that as soon as they feel that there is something is impeding their growth, they'll change it.
In terms of the current crisis, there's a feeling that within the US you know what you've got, that you know how bad the crisis is. In China, it's rather opaque. and that people really don't know how bad the situation is or could get. Is that an example of perhaps the transparency that's needed within the system?
I think that that's one thing, that transparency is needed, because when people know what is going on, and then there is a reaction from the market that normally, not always, but normally will help recovery faster than if you're ignorant and you're just going on with the assumptions that are from last year, and obviously that's not going to work. What has an effect is to organize the environment for business creation. To say, we will support businesses, we'll support business creation, we'll try to create an economy that grows and is vibrant, and if there is any slowdown, like these days, then we'll be very aggressive to increase demand. It's actually ironic that Western economists and policymakers probably know the lessons of the Great Depression and the need for fast policy action better than anyone else. But so far, the only government that has had aggressive actions was the government of China, that announced the fiscal package in the fall of about $600 billion, and now they're talking about a second fiscal policy package. So in some sense, the reaction in China might be, at the end of the day, the fastest and the most appropriate one compared to all the Western economies.
Professor Ilian Mihov, Professor of Economics at INSEAD, thanks for joining us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you very much.